What I want to consider in this video is the question which you can see on the screen there, and the question is the game up in the world of crypto? And to give context to this discussion, I am recording this on February 6th, 2026, and on the prior day, February 5th, we saw what really can only be described as a series of car crashes regarding the world of cryptocurrencies. Bitcoin dropped more than 10%, quite a bit more actually, Ether about 15%, and the same was true for all of the other alternative crypto coins. Now, we could then say, well, was this simply a correction, a significant one, in what is still a bullish argument or bullish case for owning crypto, investing in crypto? Or, as many are starting to ask, including myself, have we actually reached some kind of day of reckoning, some kind of decision point with regard to the future viability of owning Bitcoin, investing in it as a financial asset? One of the main drivers, I think it must be said, in addition to all the bullish talk about the limited supply, etc., is this idea that Bitcoin has steadily gone up. There have been obviously some exceptions to that, but broadly speaking, especially perhaps since Donald Trump came to office, there's been a bullish tone in the price of crypto, until fairly recently, that is. Now, I think it must be accepted that the main driver of investor interest in Bitcoin is that it does go up. But if that is no longer the case, then we have to kind of re-examine the fundamental premises as to whether or not it does make sense to hold and continue to accumulate Bitcoin, for example, as a financial asset. All right, let's begin then by looking at the chart on the screen, which is for Bitcoin. It's a daily chart. It covers 7-8 months and includes the peak value for Bitcoin back here in October of 25, and this is around $125,000. As can be seen here, as captured on February the 6th, you can see that we had a very big down day here of more than 10%, and we came down and intraday touched $60,000, but as and when this is being recorded, we have bounced back and we're somewhere in the region of $68,000. Now, from a technical point of view, you can see all kinds of weakness here. We are way below the green line, which is the 200-day moving average. We have another crossover. We had one back here, but we have another crossover here of the 20-day moving average dropping below the 50-day, which is a second bearish signal in relation to the one we saw back here. Now the question is, what kind of recovery might we see, and what is the likelihood that we could actually see a resumption of a more favorable bullish trend in Bitcoin? Well, obviously it remains to be seen, but my suspicion would be that we will make an effort to get above the $70,000 level, $70,000 level, somewhere around here. It has some psychological impact. The drop below $70,000 set off quite a wave of selling on February 5th. And perhaps if we were to move as high as $72,000, $73,000, one could make the case that we have effectively made a bottom in Bitcoin and that we could see eventually a resumption of a more bullish trend. However, my own suggestion, based on looking at the chart, based on some other indicators, which I'm going to come on to, is that I think that Bitcoin is going to struggle here. It would not be surprising to see lower values than the $60,000 that was seen intraday on Feb 5th. It would not be surprising to see those levels breached and perhaps in even quite a big further leg down. Let me now turn to strategy. Now, this is under the symbol MSTR, and as is well known, strategy tracks. It is essentially a Bitcoin treasury company. It tracks the price of Bitcoin. Now, there's all kinds of complicating factors regarding Strategy. They have issued, in addition to their common equity, they have issued some more complex types of equity securities and even some debt. And there are issues about payments of dividends, etc., that need to be made on some of the preferred, for example. Now, if we look at the chart, this is really quite a grim chart, as can be seen here. We can see that we got down to essentially around 107 on February 5th, which is the value right here. Now, to look back at where we have been previously, we actually reached this level here of more than $460 a share. So that is more than 80% drop basically between there and where we are here. Now, as I say, Strategy is one of the key things to look at with Strategy is what's known as the MNAV, which has to do essentially with the premium, if there is one, between the share price or the market cap effectively, or enterprise value as Strategy likes to look at it, of the business versus their holdings of Bitcoin. They hold more than 700,000 Bitcoins, and with the values at around, well, let's put it at around $65,000, $68,000, which is where we are, that is worth about $50 billion. Now, the MNAV at the moment is, as you'll see in a moment, about just above 1.06, 1.08. Now, the question is, why would people want to continue buying the shares of Strategy, MSTR, if in fact the MNAV was to drop below 1? At that point, it would seem to me the business model of Strategy is all over, and that would then potentially lead to a liquidation of the company, where quite a lot of investors who've decided that the way to own Bitcoin is by buying essentially a proxy or tracker effectively, that would suggest that that model is all over, as I indicated. Now let's turn to looking at some of the fallout from the chart actions that we've been looking at. So what I've done here is look at the key metrics for Strategy, MSTR. This comes from their own webpage, which I captured just a little while ago. This is the closing price on the 5th, which was 107. As this is being recorded, I believe we're closer to 114, 115. First of all, you can see that the company owns 713,000 Bitcoins. You can see the price there, 67,000, which means that the value of their 700,000 plus Bitcoin is just a little below 48 billion. And you can see the enterprise value that Bitcoin likes to use to determine the MNAV. This is the number over here. So the enterprise value is essentially the value of the common equity, which is there. It includes some debt, and it includes some preferred equity as well. Given that enterprise value of essentially 50 billion, we can see that Strategy is claiming an MNAV of 1.06. So we are above 1, but as I indicated in my earlier remarks, it remains quite critical, really, for stakeholders of Strategy that this MNAV value does not fall below 1. One could even make the case that it needs to be quite a bit higher than that. The danger, of course, is that if the price of Bitcoin does continue to decline, which of course will bring the enterprise value down even further, then we could be looking at a liquidation event where the company starts having to liquidate its holdings of Bitcoin, perhaps to meet the obligations it has with regard to some of its preferred equity and so on. And the final slide that I want to look at in regard to some of the price action that I've been discussing, I just wanted to mention, because this may not be widely known, having to do with some notable holders of MSTR shares. So, for example, the Norwegian Central Bank, which in turn manages the large sovereign wealth fund in Norway, the world's largest actually, with holdings or AUM of more than $2 trillion. The Central Bank of Norway has been a long-term holder of MSTR and holds approximately 3 million shares. Now, given the share price that I've just been discussing, that shareholding must be worth around $350, $360 million. Not that significant a percentage of the $2 trillion that the sovereign wealth fund holds, but still somewhat significant. SAMA, which is the Saudi central bank, has holdings, at least as far as one can estimate, of only around 25,000 shares, which means that its exposure to MSTR is really rather minimal. But just by contrast, the Swiss National Bank increased its holdings of the shares by approximately 17% during the latter part of 2025. And it is believed, at least there's not been reported otherwise, or at least it doesn't come to my attention, that they have been divesting their holdings of MSTR. Now, one could argue that in the case of these holdings by these institutions I've mentioned, these might be considered to be sticky or stable holdings, perhaps in line with the whole idea of hodling, HODL, hold on for dear life. But on the other hand, if in fact the liquidation does become a real possibility for MSTR, one has to believe that these institutions would themselves be liquidating their holdings as well. Well, I hope very much that you found that video to be interesting and of some value. And could I then suggest that you decide to subscribe to my YouTube channel, the Corcoran Codex. There is no obligation, you don't have to make any payments, but you will then be notified when I add new recordings, new videos to my channel. And all these videos are around the theme, which is mentioned on the screen, analyzing critical ideas and episodes in the world of global finance. Thanks for watching.